Welcome to Seriously Seinfeld, the serious side of Seinfeld, by Rebecca Conrad. I'm Rob Gerard, your narrator. Insight on Jason Alexander. The sea was angry that day, my friends. Although this is constantly quoted by die-hard Seinfeld fans, it's hard to imagine this line being delivered by anyone other than Jason Alexander in the role of George Costanza. The same could be said for many of the other now iconic quotes uttered by George over the years. No one else could have mastered the intensity required to capture George's disposition. When the pilot, The Seinfeld Chronicles, was being cast, Jason Alexander was sent a few pages of the script. He had been on Broadway and in a few movie roles, most recently Pretty Woman at this point. With no direction and a little to go on, he taped himself replicating a Woody Allen-type dialogue, complete with glasses and an unembellished New York accent, and within a week was asked to meet with Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David, and the network in L.A. Upon his return to New York, Jason got the call that he would be cast as George Costanza. The character of George was created with Larry David in mind. Many of the storylines revolving around George were taken directly from Larry's personal experiences. Larry went on a tirade on the set of Saturday Night Live, stormed off, and then returned the next day as if nothing had happened. On Seinfeld, George asked for a realtor and quit after telling the boss exactly what he thought of him, and then returned the next day, just as Larry had, hoping he could fly under the radar and resume his job position. It didn't really work. Jason developed a deep love and understanding of Larry and studied him in depth to create the ideal George character. This is very apparent if you have seen both Seinfeld and Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is highly recommended, by the way. Having to put himself into a much funnier headspace to play George Costanza, he claims he is nothing at all like George. Jason is introverted, shy, honest, and not out for laughs. Often described as the loser of the foursome, George was largely self-loathing and blamed his idiosyncrasies mainly on his upbringing. He continuously tried to improve what he perceived to be his shortcomings, striving for better hair, a better personality, better career choices, to name a few. But his endeavors never lasted long and rarely came to fruition. His exploits rarely resulted in a positive outcome and more often than not, worsened his current situation. Jason has said that George had a sense of worthlessness with an inflated ego. He had a certain charm about him, no admirable talent, and had no problem acknowledging that he was a mess. This was a perfect description of the George we have all come to know and love, despite his quirks. George was the quintessential best friend and confidant of Jerry throughout Seinfeld. As Jerry's character was more sensible and no nonsense, their dynamic worked together very well, with George often involving Jerry in his hijinks. The addition of Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Elaine to the cast caused some concern for Jason. Suddenly, a three-person show was a four-person show, as he feared Elaine would be taking on more of the role as Jerry's friend, and the spotlight in that regard would be shifted. He quickly saw how integral Elaine was to the plot and gained a deep respect for her. They became close friends, which they remain today. He considers the dynamic foursome of Jerry, Kramer, Elaine, and himself as a unique and chemically perfect ensemble. There is no disputing that, as it is clear these four were perfectly cast for what would become one of the most iconic comedy shows of all time. Even though Jason describes himself as shy, he had little trouble speaking up about an episode he was not written into. Kramer and George were not included in the episode The Pen. The plot called for Jerry and Elaine to travel to Florida to visit Jerry's parents, leaving Kramer and George out of the loop. Jason confronted creator and writer Larry David and stated if he was omitted from any more future episodes, he would no longer be interested in doing the show. Jason wanted the steady role and was not going to settle for anything else. Jason Alexander is a well-spoken, thoughtful individual with great insight and has great admiration for his castmates. When asked about Kramer, Jason knows no one besides Michael Richards that could have played the part. He had long admired his work and the physicality and timing he brought to the role of Kramer. Jason had said there is a lot he still does not know about Jerry, but recalls fondly how generous Jerry was to everyone on the show. There have been certain rumors circulating over the years about George's fiancée, Susan, played by Heidi Swedberg, and how or why she left the show, exiting the role when her character ingested poisonous glue on cheap wedding invitations. Jason found Heidi hard to work with. They did not mesh well in their scenes together, and he found it very difficult to play off Heidi's character of Susan. The anticipated dynamic wasn't working, and the chemistry just wasn't there. The producers thought the end result was acceptable, but when the other cast members reported the same problem working with Heidi, the decision was made for Heidi to leave the show. Not all Seinfeld fans appreciated this, as it may have come across as too dark and callous on a sitcom. However, George's and the others' lackadaisical reaction to Susan's sudden death brought some reassurance to the plot that even when something serious happens, they can be counted on not to be terribly bothered by it. It is for this reason Seinfeld maintained its comedy status, even this many years later. We have our own lives to reflect on when it comes to be sad about someone dying, or feel rejected when a love interest dumps us, or feel envious when a best friend gets engaged. Seinfeld always brings us to the opposite, offering us the humorous side to life's inevitable downfalls. I like to think George Costanza was an integral part of this premise, because without him, we may never have known the total comedic beauty of misfortune, which is important to surviving it. And no one ever played that better than Jason Alexander. Thank you for tuning in to another blog episode of Seriously Seinfeld. And don't forget to join the Facebook groups Seriously Seinfeld and Seinfeld Fanatics. And look for Rebecca Conrad.